Medieval winter isn't about cozy snowflakes outside the window or sledding down a hill. It's a brutal, merciless 4-month marathon where your main goal is simply not to die before spring. Every day turned into a mathematical equation where your own calories, firewood, and warmth were at stake. We'll talk about how they slept, what they ate, and why ordinary water became their worst enemy. Every aspect of their winter life was governed by strict, invisible rules of harsh survival. Breaking any of these unwritten rules meant an immediate and very tragic end for the entire family. Winter didn't begin with the first frost on the grass, but with ruthless mathematics. And the peasants understood this math far better than today's highly paid dietitians. The main resource wasn't warm fur clothing, but plain old human calories that provided energy. Today, we obsessively count calories to fit into our favorite jeans by the start of summer. In the Middle Ages, they counted them so their hearts wouldn't simply stop from exhaustion on a deep, frosty night. A modern adult man working in an office needs about 2,500 calories a day. We get them from tasty sandwiches, sweet lattes, and random snacks in front of the monitor. A peasant in winter needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories just for basic physical survival. Why was this such a huge and daunting number for an ordinary person? Because the biting cold forced the body to burn energy at an incredibly alarming rate. Every physical action you take in the cold requires twice as much energy as in the warmth. Chopping wood, carrying icy water in heavy buckets, repairing the roof, all of this depletes your internal reserves. Modern mountaineers and polar explorers consume 6,000 calories to avoid losing weight on expeditions. But they have chocolate, freeze-dried meat, and high-tech energy gels in their backpacks. A peasant had only turnips, hard, moldy bread, and if he was very lucky, a piece of salted lard. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the diet of the past was as meager and monotonous as possible. No fresh vegetables, no vitamin supplements from the pharmacy, or tropical fruits from the nearest supermarket. You ate only what you managed to grow, harvest, and salt or dry during the short summer. 90% of your diet consisted of heavy carbohydrates of dubious quality and coarse fiber. Modern fitness trainers would faint at the sight of such a dreadful macronutrient balance. But it was precisely these slow-burning carbohydrates that provided the long-lasting fuel that saved people from freezing to death. But there is one huge physiological problem you would have faced by mid-December. Your modern digestive system simply couldn't handle such coarse and heavy food. Medieval bread was often made with an admixture of acorns, sawdust, and stone grit from millstones. Your teeth would start wearing down rapidly, and your stomach would respond with excruciating pain to such an extreme diet. What sustained a peasant would almost certainly land a modern person in the intensive care unit. Scientists recently discovered something astonishing about the metabolism of people from the distant past. Their gut microbiota was radically different from ours, having adapted to breaking down tough plant fibers. Peasants essentially had a powerful, built-in internal bioreactor for digestion in their stomachs. They could extract calories from such tough foods that we today consider completely inedible. Nature modified their bodies from the inside so they could survive the winter without modern food. By mid-January, food supplies in the house always began to dwindle rapidly and alarmingly. It was a dreadful time, often referred to in historical chronicles as the cruel months of famine. Every meal was strictly rationed by the head of the household to stretch the meager remains until the first days of spring. Imagine sitting by the fire and realizing with horror that your portion has been cut in half. Meanwhile, the cold outside only intensifies, demanding even more vital energy from your weakened body. It is the brutal mathematics of survival, where any miscalculation led to the starvation of the entire family. Many peasants during this period fell into a state of light, almost animal-like winter hibernation. They consciously minimized any physical exertion unless it was absolutely critical. You didn't go for a walk in the woods to admire the snow, nor did you engage in sports for pleasure. Every extra movement you made burned precious grain that was in your rumbling stomach. Today we call this energy conservation, but back then it was called harsh common sense. Even ordinary drinking water in winter became a huge problem, requiring a significant expenditure of calories. You couldn't just turn on a chrome faucet and pour yourself a glass of clean, filtered water. First, you had to break the thick ice on a well or stream with a heavy iron crowbar. Then carry those heavy buckets home and spend precious firewood to melt that ice. You expended a huge amount of energy just to be able to simply have a drink. In the end, it wasn't the physically strongest or the bravest in battle who survived. It was the one who knew best how to manage their calorie budget over the course of 100 long days. It was like the most complex economic strategy, except the stakes were your own life. Modern managers love to boast about their ability to allocate the massive budgets of large companies. Peasants masterfully managed the budget of their own bodies, and they had no room for even the slightest mistake. Now let's take a look at the very place where you plan to hide from the bitter cold. Your cozy apartment with central heating and heated floors is a thing of the distant past. Welcome to a medieval peasant hut that looks more like a crooked shed made of sticks and mud. The walls were made of interwoven branches, haphazardly plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, and cow dung. Sounds like the world's worst eco-startup, doesn't it? But it was precisely this dubious architectural masterpiece that stood between you and the icy, biting wind. The first thing that would shock a modern person inside is the absolute darkness and the bone-chilling cold. In such houses, there were very often no windows as we know them, only small openings. At night, these holes were tightly plugged with straw or covered with a dried bull's bladder. They let in practically no daylight, but they were excellent at letting in freezing drafts. The temperature inside rarely rose above a pitiful 10 degrees Celsius in the winter. You're probably thinking you could just build a big fire right in the middle of your room. And you're absolutely right. The hearth was indeed located right in the middle of the earthen floor of a peasant hut. But there's a deadly, invisible trap lurking here that directors of historical Hollywood films constantly forget. In most such houses until the late Middle Ages, there were no proper brick or stone chimneys. The smoke simply rose toward the thatched roof and seeped very slowly through it to the outside. Imagine you built a big campfire in your living room and tightly closed all the doors. In 10 minutes, you'll start to feel severely short of breath, and your eyes will turn red and water uncontrollably. Peasants lived in this thick, suffocating, smoky haze throughout the long winter months. This inevitably led to chronic lung diseases and very early blindness in almost all adults. Choosing between certain death from the cold and slow carbon monoxide poisoning, they chose the latter. Modern medicine confidently confirms that inhaling such smoke is equivalent to smoking a whole pack of cigarettes a day. Scientists studying ancient human remains from that time often found lungs that were completely black from thick soot. But here's what's truly surprising. This same acrid smoke also provided a huge, invaluable benefit. It constantly smoked out the straw roof from the inside, effectively killing parasites, bed bugs, and mice. You literally smoked out your own home every day so it wouldn't rot along with you. A brilliant, though utterly ruthless, engineering solution of antiquity. To preserve the meager scraps of warmth, large families slept all together in one huge bed. Often, even the most prized domestic animals, such as small piglets or goats, joined them. It sounds horribly unhygienic, but the animals served as excellent, free biological heaters. The warmth of their fluffy bodies helped raise the temperature in the sleeping area by a couple of precious degrees. Modern underfloor heating systems nervously smoke on the sidelines next to a warm goat, peacefully sleeping at your feet. Sleeping in such Spartan conditions had nothing in common with our comfortable modern rest. People slept half-sitting, propped up with hard pillows, in a pile of coarse, prickly woolen blankets. They were terrified of lying completely flat, believing that doing so could cause them to suffocate from a rush of blood to the head. In reality, this position simply helped them breathe a little easier in the smoke-filled room. What they sincerely believed to be a mystical superstition was pure physiological pragmatism. Firewood was your main asset for the winter, far more important than glittering gold or silver. The cutting of good timber was strictly controlled by the local lord, and peasants were allowed to gather only fallen deadwood. To heat even such a small hut all winter long required whole tons of dry wood. If you fell ill in the fall and hadn't stockpiled firewood, the coming winter became your personal executioner. No one would come to your aid, because no one simply had any spare resources. This harsh rule of survival worked flawlessly and cruelly for centuries. Interestingly, coarse clothing was almost never taken off inside the house for the sake of warmth. You went to bed in the very same layers of wool you'd worked in all day on the icy street. Bathing in winter wasn't just a great rarity, it was considered outright an insane suicide. Taking off your clothes meant instantly losing the body's accumulated heat and quickly catching pneumonia. Modern dermatologists would go mad, but back then the dried-on dirt literally served as an extra protective layer. In the end, your icy home was a harsh fortress where every element served a single purpose. It offered you no comfort. It gave you only a slim chance of surviving until the warm dawn. You sat in the darkness, choking on smoke, surrounded by stinking pigs and coughing relatives. And yet you were absolutely happy because beyond that thin wall, icy death was howling. Let's be honest, after that, your cramped, mortgaged apartment starts to feel like a veritable royal palace. What do you think the peasants actually did when a winter night lasted 15 hours straight? A modern person would simply turn on the light, sit down at a computer, or start reading an engaging book. But our ancestors had no electricity, and good candles were unrealistically and frighteningly expensive. Life came to a standstill with the onset of darkness, and vast expanses were plunged into deep, impenetrable gloom. The only source of light was a dying hearth, which barely illuminated a tiny patch of space around itself. An ordinary wax candle cost as much as a worker's daily wage, so it was lit only on holidays. There was only one free pastime available to absolutely all social classes: a long sleep. The poor could not afford to waste precious fuel or wax on idle gatherings. As soon as the last rays of the sun disappeared over the horizon, the village fell silent. The cold forced people to crawl under heavy blankets as quickly as possible to preserve every scrap of warmth. This is where one of the strangest and most intriguing mysteries of medieval peasant life lies. People of the past did not sleep for 8 hours straight, as we so happily do today. Today it seems natural to us to go to bed in the evening and wake up only in the morning. However, in the 13th century, such a routine would have seemed extremely strange and even physically impossible to people. Their bodies operated on completely different rhythms, dictated by nature itself and the absence of artificial lighting. Their long night's rest was divided into two distinct parts, known as the first and second sleep. They went to bed almost immediately after sunset, around 6 or 7 in the evening. It sounds like a strict kindergarten schedule, but there was a perfectly logical biological explanation for it. The body needed rest after grueling physical labor in the icy wind. Going to sleep early allowed them to make the most of the time when the house was still warm from the daytime fire. Most remarkably, modern scientists have fully confirmed this phenomenon through experimentation. In the 1990s, physiologist Thomas Verr placed people in conditions resembling a medieval winter. He removed artificial lighting and left them with only 14 hours of complete darkness each day. The participants initially resisted, but their bodies quickly recalled their ancient settings. This experiment proved that our brains still retain the memory of the rhythms of life of our distant ancestors. After a month, all participants in the experiment spontaneously switched to a double sleep regimen without any coercion. It turned out that 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep is an artificial habit imposed on us by the Industrial Revolution. Our biology is inherently and permanently programmed for the medieval nighttime rest pattern. When the electricity goes out, our bodies strive to return to their natural roots. We simply forgot about this because of the bright lights that stay on in our homes until midnight. During this nighttime break, amazing and highly beneficial hormonal processes took place. The human body released large amounts of prolactin, a hormone that reduces stress and induces a sense of calm. People use this quiet time for peaceful reflection and conversation in complete darkness. For a peasant whose life was filled with hard labor, this was the only moment of true peace. In essence, it was their version of modern psychological therapy and deep meditation. In this state of hormonal calm, people often had very vivid and meaningful dreams. Waking up between the two phases of rest helped them better remember these visions and reflect on their meaning. The nighttime waking hours were filled with a special, mystical atmosphere that we have completely lost today. People did not feel exhausted or tired. On the contrary, their minds were exceptionally clear. It was a natural mechanism for the psyche to protect itself from the immense pressure of harsh reality. Then, around 2 or 3 in the morning, the time for the second, final sleep would come. People would go back to bed and sleep until the very first timid light of dawn. This second stage of sleep was usually much deeper, more sound and restorative. In the morning, they woke up rested and ready for a new day of the harsh struggle for survival. Today, we call waking up in the middle of the night insomnia and swallow handfuls of pills to fall asleep faster. The bonfires were meant to remind people that light would surely return and that darkness is not eternal. Loud songs and dances helped release the accumulated tension and fear of starvation. Feasts in the middle of winter consumed a significant portion of the food supply, but it was a necessary sacrifice for the sake of preserving peace. If people hadn't celebrated during those dark days, they would have simply sunk into utter despair. The festival was a kind of medicine that kept entire communities from complete moral decay. Modern psychology perfectly understands and explains this mechanism of collective defensive compensation. When stress levels go through the roof, a large group of people needs a controlled emotional outburst. The Romans called it Saturnalia. Medieval people called it the Merry Winter Holidays. Strict rules of conduct were temporarily suspended, and a simple peasant could even joke about his lord with impunity. It was a pressure relief valve for a system that was on the verge of physical collapse. Such carnivals allowed people to temporarily forget about class distinctions and the harsh hierarchy. The universal merriment leveled the rich and the poor in their shared struggle against the cold and darkness. People wore masks and ridiculous costumes to scare away the evil spirits of winter. This gave a sense of control over the situation, when in reality a person was completely powerless against the elements. The psychological release was so powerful that its energy lasted all the way until spring. So the next time you unexpectedly wake up at 3 in the morning, don't panic. It might just be your inner medieval peasant waking up, demanding to check the smoldering hearth. Our genetics still vividly remember those long, dark winters, full of cold and primal fear. We've hidden this ancient fear behind bright neon signs and glowing smartphone screens. But cut the power for a couple of days, and we'll remember the rules of double sleep all over again.
Fresh loaves, still warm from the oven.
Let's talk in detail about what was supposed to protect you from frostbite on the street. If you're thinking of the beautiful, fluffy fur coats from TV shows, forget about that immediately. Luxurious, expensive furs were worn only by lords and wealthy merchants because they cost a fortune. An ordinary person could only admire the sable trim on a nobleman's collar from afar. For most people, however, the main protection came from coarse fabrics that they made entirely by hand. An ordinary peasant wore only what he grew in the field or sheared from his own sheep. And believe me, these clothes were as coarse as they were remarkably effective in the cold. But the daily experience of wearing them was more like a form of torture for your skin. The fabrics had never seen delicate processing, so every seam felt as sharp as a knife. The clothes were heavy, restricted movement, and constantly reminded you of their presence with an unpleasant itch. Nevertheless, it was precisely this smelly and prickly suit that separated a person from the icy embrace of death. Your first layer was always a long shirt woven from coarse linen or stiff hemp. This rough fabric had absolutely nothing in common with the soft cotton of your modern t-shirts. It pricked mercilessly, rubbed the skin raw until it bled, and was completely inelastic. Linen absorbed sweat well, but in the harsh winter, this became a deadly problem for the wearer. If you sweated during hard work, the shirt became damp and instantly sucked the heat out of you. Such clothing could withstand even heavy freezing rain without letting a person get soaked to the bone. Lanolin acted as a natural shield, trapping heat inside the fibers even in wet weather. The wool was very dense, almost like felt, and provided excellent protection against the biting winter wind. However, due to its high fat content, the fabric felt sticky to the touch and was very heavy. You were literally wearing a piece of sheepskin with all its protective properties. This was clothing designed not for beauty, but for sheer survival. But this ingenious, natural waterproofing came at a very high and unpleasant price. Clothing made from such dirty, unwashed wool smelled, to put it mildly, very distinctively and pungently. In damp weather, you smelled like a flock of wet sheep locked in a small, stuffy shed. However, there was no choice between a pleasant perfume scent and death from hypothermia. Survival always smells very bad, and our wise ancestors knew this better than any of us. The smell of animal fat mingled with the aroma of soot from the hearth and the smell of sweat. This complex bouquet of scents accompanied the peasant throughout his long and difficult life. Washing such wool meant washing away the protective layer of lanolin and rendering the clothing useless against the rain. Therefore, tunics were cleaned dry simply by beating the dust and dried-on dirt out of them. Over time, the smell became so ingrained that it was impossible to remove by any means. But in a world where everyone smelled the same, this didn't particularly bother anyone. The main rule of winter survival was strict layering, not a single thick, heavy jacket. A peasant might wear 2 shirts, 3 woolen tunics, and 1 thick cloak. Why did they use such a strange system instead of a single, thick fur coat? Because the air between the layers of clothing acted as a perfect, free thermal insulator. Modern hikers use the exact same 3-layer principle for their winter treks. Only they buy high-tech synthetics for hundreds of dollars, while peasants did this for free 1,000 years ago. Each new layer of fabric created an additional barrier against the cold trying to reach the body. If it got too hot while working, one could simply remove one of the tunics. This allowed them to regulate their temperature and sweat less, which was critically important in winter. Thick woolen wraps on the legs complemented this multi-layered cocoon, protecting the joints from rheumatism. People look like walking cabbages, but this system really worked in the harshest frosts. We still use their discoveries today, though we call them by trendy names. Your feet were always the most vulnerable part of your body in winter, and that's where the real nightmare began. Modern, warm boots with thick rubber treaded soles simply didn't exist back then. Shoes were made of thin leather, which instantly got soaked and froze in deep snow. To avoid losing their toes to gangrene, peasants resorted to extreme methods of insulation. They stuffed their thin leather shoes with dry straw or scraps of sheep's wool. The thin soles offered no protection against the icy ground, and the cold quickly seeped in through the seams. Their feet were constantly in a state of mild frostbite, leading to pain and cracks in the skin. People tried to walk through the deep snow as little as possible, treading narrow paths between houses. The only salvation was the straw padding, which at least retained some heat. Without this simple device, any trip to the well could end in the loss of one's toes. Footwear was the weakest link in the medieval wardrobe, requiring constant attention and care. The straw inside the boot created an excellent air cushion and absorbed excess moisture from sweaty feet. It was cheap, incredibly practical, and kept limbs intact until spring. If the straw got wet, they simply threw it away and took a new, dry portion from the haystack. It sounds like a funny and absurd life hack from the internet, but it saved millions of peasants' feet from amputation. Your best winter footwear literally grew in the field behind your house every single year. This method of insulation was available even to the poorest of the poor in the most remote village. Straw was often mixed with dried, aromatic herbs to at least slightly mask the unpleasant odors. Feet in such boots looked huge and clumsy, but that didn't matter at all. The main thing was to maintain mobility and avoid blood poisoning from frostbite. The simplicity of this solution amazes even experienced modern survivalists with its effectiveness. Medieval people knew how to make use of the most ordinary things lying right at their feet. Your wardrobe was incredibly sparse. Most ordinary people had only 2 sets of clothes. One was for everyday wear, in which they worked hard, slept, and sweated day in and day out. The second set was festive and clean, and was worn only to church on Sundays. Fabric was so expensive that good clothes were often passed down from father to son. Losing a woolen cloak was as great a tragedy as crashing a new, expensive car is today. To combat parasites, clothes were sometimes hung outside in the bitter cold overnight. The insects froze, but as soon as you put the fabric back on your warm body, the surviving eggs hatched again. It was an endless, exhausting war in which man never won a definitive victory. Fleas and lice were faithful companions to every person from birth to the grave. They spared neither the poor in their shacks nor kings in their massive stone castles. Even the most noble figures suffered from bites and constant itching beneath their silk garments. Scholars have discovered special back scratchers made of gold and adorned with precious stones, not to mention ordinary people whose only tools were their own fingernails. The battle against parasites was part of everyday life, as routine as eating or sleeping. People simply accepted it as an inevitable evil that could never be completely overcome. Your life was filled with tiny but extremely annoying enemies that drank your blood every night. As a result, your winter clothing was heavy, smelly, prickly, and teeming with tiny parasites. But it was precisely this clothing that served as your personal suit of armor in the battle against the icy, merciless elements. Every rough seam and every grease-soaked thread served a single purpose: to keep the heat inside. Today we complain if a trendy sweater is a little itchy or doesn't match the color of our sneakers. We've forgotten that the original function of clothing is to protect your life, not to display social status. The next time you put on a light, soft down jacket, think of your ancestors. They survived in conditions that today seem impossible for normal life. Their clothing was full of pain and discomfort, but it allowed them to live to see the next spring. We have become pampered and weak, having lost touch with this harsh school of survival. Perhaps we should sometimes recall the smell of wet sheep and prickly flax to appreciate comfort. How long could you last in this woolen armor before begging for mercy? The most terrifying nightmare of a medieval winter was far from the cold itself. The real monster, mercilessly killing entire families, was a common cold or a mild infection. What today is quickly cured with hot tea and a couple of days in a warm bed watching TV shows was then a death sentence. A peasant didn't have a handy first aid kit with antibiotics, fever reducers, or even an electronic thermometer. All he had was garlic, fervent prayer, and advice from the local doctor. Advice that would make your blood run cold. Imagine that you got severely chilled while chopping wood and developed a high fever. Today, you would simply take some acetaminophen to bring down the fever and relieve the muscle aches. A medieval doctor, if you could even find one, would offer you a completely different, radical solution. He would have taken out a sharp knife or a special instrument and without a second thought would have bled you. In their authoritative opinion, the illness was caused by an excess of hot blood, which needed to be released immediately. It sounds like a gory scene from a second-rate horror movie, but bloodletting was the primary medical procedure of the time. A sick person whose exhausted body was already fighting with its last ounce of strength would have half a liter of blood drawn. This instantly weakened the immune system and very often led to death from an infection introduced by a dirty knife. But doctors of the past sincerely and wholeheartedly believed they were doing the patient a genuine favor. Surprisingly, in some very rare cases, this did temporarily lower blood pressure and create the illusion of improvement. But in 90% of cases, such barbaric treatment only hastened your journey to the village graveyard. If you developed a severe chest cough, terrifying medieval pharmacology came into play. There were no sweet pharmacy cough syrups. Instead, there were decoctions made from whatever grew underfoot. Medicines were often based on vinegar, honey, old wine, and an incredible number of dubious herbs. Some recipes included such crazy ingredients as crushed spider webs, ashes from a burned toad, or manure. You drank this murky concoction with your eyes closed, hoping it would kill the illness before it killed you. But here's what's really interesting. When modern scientists set out to test these crazy recipes, it turned out that the famous bald eagle's eye certainly didn't work, but many herbs were powerful natural antiseptics. The mixture of honey, garlic, and vinegar, which was often used for wounds and inflammations, actually killed bacteria. Honey drew out moisture, garlic provided allicin, and vinegar created an acidic environment incompatible with microbial life. Medieval people didn't even know the word bacteria, but they experimentally figured out ways to fight them. Scurvy became a particularly dire problem in winter, a disease that modern people have only read about in books about pirates. Due to the complete lack of fresh vegetables, the body was critically deficient in the vital vitamin C. Gums began to bleed, teeth became loose and fell out, and old, healed wounds suddenly reopened. It was a slow and very painful decline of the body due to the meager, endless winter diet. Peasants knew nothing of chemistry, but intuitively tried chewing pine needles, which contained life-saving ascorbic acid. And what happened if you broke your leg simply by slipping on the ice near your house? Today they would take an X-ray, carefully administer a painkiller, and apply a smooth, lightweight cast. In the 14th century, bone setting took place without any anesthesia except for a mug of strong ale. The bone setter would forcefully pull the limb back into place while the patient was still conscious, then secure it with rough, wooden splints. The pain was so excruciating that even strong men often lost consciousness right in the middle of the procedure. And even after that, there was always a huge risk that the bone would heal crooked, leaving you permanently lame and disabled. Any open wound in winter posed a colossal threat due to the total lack of sanitation in homes. Infections spread rapidly, and it was practically impossible to stop gangrene once it had set in. The only radical way to save a life was immediate amputation of the affected limb. The operation was performed with a regular axe or saw, cauterizing the stump with a red-hot iron or boiling oil. I won't even try to imagine that level of pain because it's beyond human comprehension. That is precisely why winter always demanded the utmost caution in every move you made. People moved slowly, tried not to take risks, and avoided handling sharp tools in the dark whenever possible. A simple, deep cut on your finger while sharpening a knife could cost you your right hand a week later. The price of human error was sky high, and rescue or emergency medical systems simply didn't exist. Your main and only doctor was your own exhausted immune system. Today, we constantly complain about long lines at clinics and exorbitant dental fees. We've forgotten that primal sense of utter helplessness when your body breaks down and there's no one to fix it. Survival in the Middle Ages was a cruel lottery where robust health was your only winning ticket. If you fell ill in winter, all you could do was pray and hope for an incredible miracle. And you know what? Real miracles happened extremely rarely. If you've read this far, you're most likely sitting in a very comfortable, warm room. You have round-the-clock access to hot water, a fridge full of food, and a medicine cabinet stocked with pills for every eventuality. Your life is an absolute and unattainable paradise by the harsh standards of a 14th century person. We've grown accustomed to taking our comfort for granted, as a basic right granted at birth. But history stubbornly proves that this comfort is an immense rarity, one from the wild only very recently. We saw this in their incredible digestion, their strange sleeping habits, and their phenomenal endurance. What would have broken us in a single week was simply the norm of everyday life for them. This makes one seriously reflect on just how vast the hidden reserve potential of the human body is. Many of their survival methods are still fully validated by modern science. The principle of layered woolen clothing is actively used by manufacturers of equipment for mountaineers and the military. Polyphasic or split sleep is being seriously studied by astronauts for long-duration expeditions into deep space. And the antibacterial properties of honey and garlic have been confirmed by leading microbiologists in modern laboratories around the world. Ancient people weren't stupid. They simply lacked modern technology. I sincerely hope that this journey into the past was both fascinating and a little shocking for you. History isn't just boring dates of battles and the names of great kings recorded in old dusty books. Thank you for spending this time with me and diving deep into this harsh but fascinating era. If you enjoyed this story, please support it. It helps fund new historical investigations. Don't forget to wear a warm hat when you go outside and give a heartfelt thank you to your radiator. See you in the next episodes, where we'll uncover even more forgotten but astonishing secrets of the past. Stay curious, stay warm, and remember that real history is always more interesting than any fiction.